Welcome back to Beach House 34. I'm your host, Christine Worth. It's October 17th, 2006, and it's a Tuesday night. For once, the humidity has broken a bit, and it's around 8:30. And we're on top of the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel. This is a four-diamond luxury hotel located in the heart of the French Quarter. It has a rooftop bar and a pool. Inside the Omni Hotel, you would find white tablecloths, polished marble. But step outside, and the city was still trying to put itself back together after Hurricane Katrina. This particular Tuesday night, a man is having a drink at the terrace bar on top of the Omni Hotel. He finishes his drink, walks to the edge, and jumps. He falls 5 stories, landing on the roof of the parking garage below. So here's the thing. We're about to get into the actual records, the primary sources, and the timeline of what really happened in that apartment in the French Quarter. If you're new here and you're looking for a deep dive that sticks to the facts without all the filler, I'd love to have you join us. Just click subscribe. Honestly, your support is the only reason I'm able to spend weeks in archives and with documentation for every one of these cases. Stick with me on this one. It gets interesting and a little dark. Now, police, they respond to what looks like, at first glance, a suicide. It's barely a year after Hurricane Katrina, and in New Orleans, sudden death wasn't unheard of. Sad, but true. The city was still recovering. People were still displaced, and the trauma was still fresh. And at first, this is treated like a tragedy. A man jumps from a hotel rooftop for reasons known only to him. Case closed, right? Well, no. This man was Zack Bowen. He's 28 years old and a local bartender. And when officers search his pockets for identification, they find a small plastic bag. Inside this bag was a 5-page note addressed to police only, along with Zack's Army dog tags. In another pocket, they find a key. And when they read the note, they find a confession and a map. The note begins with, and I quote, "This is not accidental. I had to take my own life to pay for the one I took." There were directions to an address at 826 North Rampart Street. It gave the name of his landlord and said that the keys to the place were in his right front pocket. All of a sudden, this goes from someone taking their own life, which is horrible in and of itself, but someone who had taken someone else's life. They had to treat this as a murder investigation. Now, to understand how a 28-year-old veteran ends up on top of a parking garage roof with a confession in his pocket, we have to rewind. We have to go back to the time when he was a local hero in New Orleans. Zack Bowen and his girlfriend, Addie Hall, are everywhere. They even make articles in the New York Times and Time magazine. Why? Hurricane Katrina is headed towards the Gulf Coast, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. On August 28th, 2005, the day before landfall, New Orleans issues a mandatory evacuation order. Hundreds of thousands of residents leave. Yes, but not all. The Louisiana Superdome was designated as a shelter of last resort for those who couldn't leave the city and had no place else to go or didn't have transportation. By the time the hurricane gets to the city, most of the city is empty. The Superdome, however, houses 20 to 30,000 people. Others were stuck in hospitals that couldn't evacuate in time. Some stay in private homes or stood on their rooftops waiting for rescue. And then the levee and the flood wall system fails in several places. Water pours into the city, and roughly 80% of the city is now underwater. By all accounts, it's an apocalypse, and the city is mostly evacuated. It's a ghost town. Two of those holdouts were Zack and Addie. They were in the French Quarter, which sits on this tiny sliver of high ground. The quarter didn't flood the way that much of the rest of the city did, but the quarter also has no power, no services. These news articles describe Zack and Addie living this bohemian survivalist dream. They're bartending by candlelight and they're cooking food on grills in the middle of the street to feed the locals and the few relief workers. They'd gathered tree limbs for cooking fires and traded alcohol for water. Zack even delivered groceries and meals by bicycle. These two young bartenders who stayed behind, cooking in the street and moving through the city on bicycles, was widely reported on. The images that were coming out of New Orleans were horrific. The nation felt helpless. And these two young, attractive, charismatic people who are saying, no, we're staying and we're going to help others who have chosen to do the same. But was it resilience? I don't want to take away here from what these two did, regardless of what a psychologist says. But there's a certain explanation for why people do what they do when a crisis hits these monumental levels. There's this study in the Journal of Applied Psychoanalytic Studies who did a breakdown. They did a breakdown of this mindset. How after the immediate aftermath of a disaster and when social structure collapses, people can enter a state of high arousal, a bond formed in anarchy. There's lack of rules, lack of jobs, lack of bills. It was sort of a high for them. But we also need to think about who they were, their biographies as to why this apocalypse of sorts felt like a vacation. Let's look at Zack. He's 28. He's from Los Angeles originally, and he had a heavy history. He had joined the Army in 2000, and he didn't join out of patriotism. He joined because he had a wife and two kids. He needed to support them, to be the provider. He even rose to the rank of sergeant. He was a very capable soldier. He served in Kosovo and then in Iraq. But in Iraq, he was at Abu Ghraib. It's now known as Baghdad Central Prison. And it became infamous during the Iraq War for two reasons. If you remember, in 2004, images, leaked photos surfaced that showed U.S. military personnel committing a series of human rights violations against detainees. This included several methods of torture, a complete breakdown of moral order. The prison was a high-threat environment. It was frequently targeted by mortar fire and suicide attacks. Now, we don't know what Zack saw or what he participated in, but we know how he came back. Friends and family saw a totally different person. He was angry, withdrawn, waking up screaming from nightmares. Classic, severe PTSD, untreated. And then he gets a general discharge, and this is a discharge under less than honorable conditions. This had to be devastating for him. He separated from his wife, felt like he couldn't face his kids, and ran to New Orleans. He puts on a mask, the charming bartender. Then he meets Addie Hall. She's the same age and has a totally different energy, but she's damaged in her own way. She's an artist, a poet, a dancer. People call her a spitfire. She's small but fierce. Bohemian is the word that keeps coming up in the sources. Underneath all of that, though, was pain, deep pain. She had a history of severe childhood sexual abuse. Her friends say that her relationships were toxic. She was protective, but volatile. A defensive wall up at all times. It was written in police reports that she was known also for flashing police officers. So you have Zack running from his life and Addie running from her own past. And suddenly their world ends. Water rushes in and the rules vanish. And for two people who felt like they didn't fit into the rest of the world, the destruction of the real world was the best thing that could have happened. They were the king and queen of the quarter, survivalists. They were important. For all intents and purposes, they were trauma bonding. This piece by the International Journal suggests that it was a shared madness, a bubble where their dysfunction looked like romance. They were drinking heavily, they were high on the adrenaline of survival, and feeding off of each other's instability. The problem is the water gets pumped out, the National Guard restores order, electricity is back on, and suddenly they're back to real life. Their own day in the spotlight is over. In late 2005 into 2006, they leave Addie's apartment and move into a small apartment above the Voodoo Spiritual Temple. Inside this apartment, the internal chaos took over. The relationship turned violent. Arguments were screaming matches that neighbors could hear. Zack's PTSD was in full force, and he was self-medicating. Addie was fighting back. And then came the cheating allegations. Addie thought that Zack was cheating on her. Whether he was or not is almost irrelevant. The trust was gone. She was preparing to end it. She went to the landlord and had the lease transferred solely into her name. This brings us to October 4th, 2006, the day before the murder. Addie goes to the landlord and tells the landlord that her and Zack had broken up. She wants him out. And here's something that will just, oh God, send your blood boiling. The landlord felt that Addie didn't seem too afraid and then told her to try to work it out. Just talk to him. This makes me want to scream. Such a dismissive reaction to a domestic situation. Addie was trying to save herself. So Addie heads back to the apartment, and we arrive now on October 5th, 2006. And this is where things turn really dark. So I want to warn you, if you're listening, we're going to discuss the details. They are graphic. They are too graphic for many people. I'm not doing this out of shock value, but because of the specific nature of what Zack did. It's a key to understanding his mental state. So I'll just give you a minute. If you want to pause here, get people out of the room, what have you. We have Zack's own account of this from the letter that he left, that letter that was in his pocket. And he writes that it happened at 1 a.m. He says, "I killed her at 1 a.m. I very calmly strangled her. It was very quick." That word calmly, it's disturbing, isn't it? This wasn't a crime of passion where he lost control. And you kind of have to wonder if this had to do with his time in Iraq. It sounds disassociated. He's detached from the reality of what he was doing. He didn't call the police. He didn't run. No, he stayed and admits to sleeping with the body before passing out. He wakes up to the reality that he has a dead body in a small apartment in the New Orleans heat. So he's got a problem to solve. He has to get rid of the evidence. Zack turns down the air conditioning to 60 degrees. It's the lowest it would go. This creates a sort of makeshift meat locker, and he begins to dismember her. He uses a hacksaw and a knife, and honestly, this is where the entire myth of cannibalism was born. Because when the police eventually do walk into the apartment, they find parts of Addie in pots on the stove. One pot had her charred head, and the other contained her hands and feet. Her legs and her arms are in roasting pans in the oven, that had seasoning. They find vegetables, chopped carrots, potatoes. In the refrigerator, a black plastic trash bag was found that contained her torso. To anyone, it would look like meal preparation. The media saw this and they ran with it, calling him the Katrina cannibal, the ultimate horror story, right? The forensic reality is very different. After Zack's suicide, there was an autopsy performed, and no trace whatsoever of human remains were in his digestive system. So why the vegetables? Why the seasoning? What was the point? Well, this is a psychological debate among experts who have looked at the case. Some felt that it was some kind of ritualistic staging, a psychotic break where he was blurring the lines between disposal and cooking. Others think it was more practical, horrific, but practical, a way to mask the smell of boiling organic matter. If it smells like a stew, maybe the neighbors won't call the cops. It's disturbing enough to think that he's standing there chopping carrots over the body of a woman he claimed to love. But there's more. If that wasn't enough, here's something that's really hard to wrap your head around. There was a 12-day ghost period. Addie died on October 5th. Zack didn't jump from the Omni Hotel until October 17th. That's nearly 2 weeks. 2 weeks he lived in that freezing cold apartment with the body parts in the oven, on the stove, and in the fridge. He wasn't just staying in the apartment, though, either. He had left the apartment and had about $1,500 in cash. And he spent it because he listed exactly how he spent his final days. He wrote good food, good drugs, good strippers. He knew he was going to die. He had already decided. He was just burning through the clock. There were reports of him going back to work at the bar for a few days, acting normal, serving drinks. People at the bar who were interviewed said that he was in this great mood. He was buying rounds for people and laughing. Can you imagine the level of disassociation required in order to do this? Every bit of me, though, says that this was just something he learned to do in Iraq. This is how he survived there, and it's how he's going to survive now. What people didn't know, though, was that Zack had been punishing himself. When they found his body, he had 28 cigarette burns. He had burned himself for every year of his life that he considered a failure. And not only that, he made a list of these failures: school, jobs, the military, his marriage, his fatherhood. To him, he saw nothing but a series of letdowns, and the murder of Addie was just the ultimate failure. He runs out of money, he can't get access to any more drugs, and now it's October 17th. He writes a 5-page letter, the one found in the plastic bag in his pocket, and addressed it to the police. And in this letter, he says this: the suicide was not accidental, saying, I had to take my own life to pay for the one I took. The letter has a synopsis of the crime, how he strangled Addie and dismembered her nearly 2 weeks earlier. He also told the police that they would find full documentation for both himself and Addie at the apartment to help assist in their identification. He gives his address, tells them that they will find the dismembered corpse of his girlfriend Addie in the oven, on the stove, and in the fridge. And he gives his full confession. The police then go to the apartment and walk in. It's freezing cold, even with the air conditioning cranked all the way down. Decomposition still happens. And what they see? They see that Zack has spray-painted messages all over the walls. I'm a failure. I love her. And then left the phone number for his ex-wife. There was also a spray-painted arrow pointing to the stove with the words, "Look in the oven." It's hard for a mind to process, but that 5-page note found in his pocket, this was just a portion of the information left behind by Zack. He had also written 8 pages inside Addie's journal. This looked as if it was intended to be a legal confession because it began with his full name, date of birth, social security number, and driver's license number. It then continues with a timeline saying, "I killed her at 1 a.m. Thursday, 5 October. I very calmly strangled her. It was very quick." He then claimed he sexually violated her corpse several times after the strangling before drinking himself into oblivion and passing out on the floor. It should be noted that NOPD, the New Orleans Police Department, later denied that there was any evidence of necrophilia. Zack continues, said he went to work in the morning delivering groceries. When he got back, he moved her body to the bathtub and used a kitchen knife and a hand saw to dismember her. His plan B was that he was going to cook the remains in an attempt to separate meat from the bone for easier disposal. A central theme through all of this was his own psychological state, saying, "I scared myself not only by the action of calmly strangling the woman I've loved for 1.5 years, but by my entire lack of remorse. I've known forever how horrible a person I am. Ask anyone." He then included instructions for the police to contact his ex-wife and family, noting that he had not told them anything which would explain the shock that was coming their way. He has constructed, quite literally, a haunted house. And in New Orleans, a story like this doesn't go away. Now, earlier, we mentioned the address of the apartment. It was directly above the voodoo spiritual temple run by Priestess Miriam. She's a legend in the city. She's a healer. But because the apartment was directly above this location, the stories in town went into overdrive. People began to whisper that evil spirits from the temple had possessed Zack. It's demonizing the location. The temple itself was a place of light and healing. The only demons in that apartment were addiction, despair, and PTSD. But don't think for a minute that that stopped the tourism industry from cashing in. Now, it didn't happen right away. The temple continued in its location for just over 9 years until a fire broke out. It destroyed much of the building, and it forced Priestess Miriam to relocate the temple to Rampart Street. After this fire, the building was leased by Mary, Bloody Mary Million. And yes, this is a real person who converted it into a haunted museum. Because, of course, you can buy a ticket. This just makes my stomach churn. And look at the actual stove and refrigerator that was in the apartment. While they are the originals, yes, the museum has added several elements to create more of a shock value. Things like fake blood splashes and a set of bride and groom Chucky dolls. Friends of Zack and Addie, as well as locals, have labeled it despicable and atrociously exploitative. And I agree. Someone trying to profit from an incredibly recent trauma. You know, she claims that her goal is to educate and pay tribute to the spirits dwelling in her building. And yeah, that's why the fake blood's there, right? But let me play devil's advocate here. You know, New Orleans is a city built on the dead. Cemetery tours are common. The LaLaurie Mansion, where people were enslaved and tortured, is a popular tourist spot for ghost hunting. Is this really any different? Or is it just that it's too soon? If we write this off as a ghost story or a cannibal monster story, we learn nothing. It's a tale of two storms, the hurricane that broke the levees, and the psychological fallout that broke the people. Zack had untreated war trauma. Addie had a history of abuse. The infrastructure collapsed. Social norms were suspended, and Zack and Addie were left alone in a pressure cooker with unlimited alcohol and no way out. They were casualties of the storm just as much as anyone else who lost their lives in the Ninth Ward. So, what's the takeaway here, besides the horror of it all? I think it's to look deeper when you see a sensational headline, when you hear the words, he or she was a monster. Ask yourself what the context might be, the human factors. The crisis often starts after the adrenaline has worn off. And I want to leave you with this thought. We've talked a lot about the breakdown of the city itself, but look at what happened. Zack and Addie were praised for being survivalists. They were praised as being heroes, and the city really needed a hero after what they were dealing with. What they were going through, actually going through, was ignored. How often are we still doing that today? If you're listening to this and you feel like you're drowning, whether it's PTSD, addiction, or an abusive relationship, there are lifelines for you to grab onto. You can call the Veterans Crisis Hotline at 1-800-273-8255. It's available 24/7. You can also reach out to the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline in the United States by calling 988. That's it, just 3 numbers. This one was tough, but important. At least I believe so. Thank you all for listening. Please take care of yourselves, and I'll be back next week at 7 p.m. Tuesday with another episode. Bye for now.